So maybe, Francesco, I mean, one of the things which was interesting is this idea of actually creating, because we're here in a national pavilion, in the Swiss pavilion, and it's obviously a project which involves Switzerland in relation to many other countries. And we've been a lot discussing with you this necessity actually of having maybe transnational cultural spaces in connection to the UNESCO. Maybe we can start there.
But let's also speak about the great idea of discussing in this pavilion, the other pavilion, the virtual pavilion, the Fun Palace, and to bring together also these two thinkers. I don't know if they ever met, probably never met.
Olaf or Elias made this live piece, they're kind of tangentially met. There has never been a real
It's part of the Biennale live. These two actually almost the same, they lived at the same time, but I don't know if they ever met. Maybe you know whether Lucius Burkhardt and Cedric Price met. If they didn't, they probably had met in a previous life because they had very similar orientations, and I think they contributed quite substantially and almost with the same tunes to some contributions to some important ideas. So thank you very much for bringing this. Lucius Burkhardt was Swiss, so it belongs to the pavilion. Cedric Price was English, but I would say also a man of the world and certainly a person that has influenced global architecture much beyond what he could materially build in his life. He didn't build very much. He was more like a thinker and an innovator than a mass builder. So let's talk about. I suppose the public has seen what is in the pavilion. Pavilion, there is a maquette, a model of the Fun Palace. The Fun Palace was, in my view, a milestone in architectural thinking, and I would like to explain why and how. Sure, there is a lot of noise, but I don't know if you can.
No, it's fine. People can hear who sits here. It's all fine.
We have to see it also in its historical development. There's nothing that comes out of the blue like this, and Fun Palace is certainly not one of those things. Hello? Is that better? Okay, so maybe I'll manage to silence those who are speaking. Am I good enough? Good. So I was saying that nothing comes out of the blue ever. So even the Fun Palace has a history, and I think we have to look at this history as a development of history of ideas in architecture. Where to situate it, this is 1964, the year of the design or the final design of this thing. Now, in 1965, a very important book came out in Italy that in a way reflects the same ideas. It's called Opera Aperta by Umberto Eco. So it's the same time, something that looks at a new form of expression, artistic and that is open, essentially, endless, not closed, not confined. It's not a closed story. Fun Palace is this. It's essentially an open architecture, an architecture that allows multiple uses, multiple design, multiple dynamics inside. So it's a new way of offering in this case, to the artistic world, the possibility of expressing different forms of art, from dance, theater, whatever. Something that in the world of art was not experimented before. Because the world of art, like in many other forms of architecture, was essentially a closed world. There was the theater model, the movie model, the dance theater, and so on. But again, it's not something out of the blue. It comes out of a very long tradition, I would say, something that started with the modernist architecture. In fact, if you think about the 1920s and 30s, when architects like Mies van der Rohe and many others, including Le Corbusier, somehow invented and propelled the idea of a serial architecture. Modern architecture is an open architecture. It's essentially an architecture which is based on a series of beams, and then you can always add the one. So there is an element, a component of endlessness in modern architecture that certainly is is reflected in the concept of an open architecture like the one of the Fan Palace. And if we look even further back, it is in fact linked to the industrial building. In fact, probably the ancient and most important building of this type is the famous Crystal Palace in London, 1851, the great exhibition palace, which was built it was a steel building, steel and glass, was built as a serial building. It could have been extended tremendously. So this idea of endlessness was matured through time, and in the 60s, it became very popular, especially in England. Maybe the British have a component of endlessness that we have to explore, especially in England, where many architects, not only Cedric Price, but many architects, in fact, injected this idea in their own realization, and even made a theory out of it. I refer to Llewyn Davis, for instance, was of course in the same time of as Cedric Price, and many others like Weeks, for instance, John Weeks. John Weeks and Llewyn Davis, by the way, worked together in many examples of, say, serial and multiple architecture for schools and hospitals and so on. And in a way, this idea of the endless architecture permeated, entered into the modernistic design. I'd like to remind, for instance, the very famous orphelinage of Van Eyck in Holland. And I would say it has become a topos, something that architects have used quite a lot. So, in a way, Cedric Price was the inventor of a new form, but at the same time, he reflected what the profession was developing at the same time in a long line that comes from the industrial buildings through the modernism forms that were created in the 1920s. Mies van der Rohe is the most serial of all the architects that we had in that time. All these buildings are essentially, extensible. You can always stretch them on with a series of additional beams and columns. Okay, so where is the novelty? Well, the novelty, first of all, is on the object, because it's a specialized object for artistic events. And it's on the idea that the forms of art that can be represented there can be mixed. So it's not a building for the dance or for the theater or for music. It's something that, in fact, allows a creation of a new form of expression, or at least the mixing of existing forms of expression. So in a way, it is new in that sense. I think the idea of Cedric Price was extremely open. He wanted something completely flexible and dynamic. You have to know that Fan Palace was never done in its form, so we only work on ideas. He was working with a very important artist and theater livelihood. And in fact, it's the connection between an artist and this architect that created this special form. Now, we don't have the Fan Palace, because it was never done. But we have some manifestations of it. And of course, the most famous is Beaubourg, because the people that were working with at that time were students of Cedric Price, were called Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers. And so if you go to Beaubourg, you find some of the elements. But Beaubourg, it is not a Fan Palace, let's be frank. It is, in fact, a closed object. I mean, where there are museums, there are theaters, there are exhibition spaces. So it is not at all the same idea. It just has some of the forms, some of the shapes of the Fan Palace. But to say that this idea actually went on, and I think that perhaps the person that can speak better open spaces and dynamic spaces is sitting on my right, because you are doing Fan Palaces, even not as an architect, but as an artist. You use that idea of a multiple flexible space to allow a new form of performance, a new dynamic of performances. Now, I think it's this is what I wanted to say on the Fan Palace. We can go on, of course, and I'd like to explore with you.
Well, that's wonderful. And before we hand over to Tino for his thoughts on the Fan Palace, you brought a drawing to show us about the city as an egg, and maybe.
I don't know if there is a.
Otherwise, we can circulate it.
Yeah. I don't know if you see it, but this is a drawing I use very often. It's drawn by Cedric Price. It shows his capacity of synthesis. Now, because you don't see it, I will describe it to you. It's called The City as an Egg, and there are three eggs: the hard-boiled eggs, the fried egg, and the scrambled egg. Now, the hard-boiled egg represents the ancient city. Now, there is a nucleus inside, and then a fixed, contour, like could be the walls or something like this. The fried egg is the city from the 17th to the 19th century, with the historic area inside and then spreading around the peripheries and so on. Right? And the scrambled egg is the modern city, where everything gets confused and scrambled. So this is a funny thing, but he was, having also fun, in addressing these issues. And maybe if you have time later on, I would like to talk also about some other contribution of Cedric Price, in particular in the field of urban planning.
But before that, I think it's a good moment to hand over to Tino and hear from Tino about the Fan Palace and the sort of relevance of it as a toolbox for the 21st century.
Yeah, maybe I just wanted to add on to what Francesco said. That's what I also learned now, like working with Hans-Ulrich on this Lucius Burkhardt, Cedric Price exhibition, that in a way both of them didn't think of architecture just as like a building, no? And to think of architecture immediately as an institution. And that's why I think this collaboration between John Littlewood, a theater maker, and Cedric Price somehow constituted this DNA of the Fun Palace. And I completely agree with it, that you can somehow access the Fun Palace from columns and open structures, but you can also access it from the inside of what and how things happen there. And of course, we don't know if the Fun Palace would have been successful. In some ways, I doubt it. I think it was too open in terms of its programming, but it would have been interesting to try, and would still be interesting to try. But I thought it was very, very fascinating for me to hear what you said about the Fun Palace, but I wanted to maybe come back also to your job at UNESCO and maybe hear you talk just shortly about why, and that's I think why we started to talk, that you felt that UNESCO, which is so known as a place for heritage, and that's also, as I understand, to the largest part your background, why you as a kind of cultural director of the UNESCO programs, why you felt it was important to include also a contemporary element to UNESCO?
Well, I think this forces me to reveal a secret. What you see here is a plot. We're doing a plot, the three of us. We're trying to define a global gallery, which sometimes we call a global gallery, the UNESCO gallery, or whatever. The name is still floating. The idea will be to have something that is moving around, an object that can be placed in different parts of the world. That's why it's global. Can have also multiples if needed. It can appear in more than one place. And can be very flexible in its uses, because it has to adapt to different contexts, climate, and conditions and uses. And but at the same time has a unified mission. The mission, of course, is to try to help artists from all sorts of artists, from video, dance, and theater, and so on, to find a space that has a global visibility, so that we can help young artists or artists in general that are less known in the world to be known and to be connected with the larger art world. This is something that we're discussing at the moment. Is a little bit more than an idea, so we need now some time to sort of go from the world, the realm of ideas, a little bit in the middle of the realm of projects, until the thing lands and becomes something fixed on the ground.
Wonderful, and there will obviously be many more conversations about this in the next months to come here in the in the Swiss Pavilion. I think maybe before we hand over to Dorothea for her final vignette, Francesco, you wanted to tell us a few last things about the Cedric Price urbanism?
Yeah, and also a little, just to close on the Fan Palace, because the Fan Palace was not just an architecture. In fact, it was born as an architecture. It was the meeting between an architect and an artist. But then little by little became something else. And I think this something else is quite interesting. You probably have explored that already in the conversation. Because this group of people crossed another group of people that at that time were developing systems of relationships, the cybernetics. So in fact, the mixing and the meeting between architects, artists, and the people of cybernetics created something very unique and very new. Because the cybernetic loved the idea that there was a space where connection had to be created through systems of interactions and so on, because that's exactly what happens in the world of cybernetics. And so little by little, the cybernetics enter into this project, which in a way, they dematerialize the project. The project, in fact, is more a cybernetic programming scheme than a physical artifact. And I think this is quite interesting because it opens, and if you think, this was 50 years ago, and the power of the informatics, the power of technology was nothing compared to what it is today. So in a way, it was prefigurating, sort of anticipating things that we can do today. Because buildings now are becoming intelligent, are becoming sensorially equipped, and they can participate. A building is an intelligent artifact that can interact. And I think that at that time they didn't have the idea that the technology could, achieve the complexity and power that it has today. But certainly they had an idea that a building per se, as a physical artifact made of columns and beams, was over. So I think that's an important contribution. Now, in terms of urban planning, I think Price and his fellows also did a very interesting contribution. I would like to actually talk about Price and Burkhardt together, because they are celebrated in this pavilion, and I think you put them together for some good reasons. Probably very different people. Burkhardt was not an architect; was more like a thinker, sociologist, anthropologist, maybe a geographer, I would say also, and somebody that, but had a very specific way of looking at the world. It was really a very accurate observer of the world, to the point that at some point he developed a theory or a practice and a theory. Actually, it was more like a discipline that he called strollology. Strollology. Strollology is the art of strolling, meaning that you walk around, essentially. So the strollologist is the person that walks around in a space, in a city, and uses this slow pace of the walking to make his observations and define his position in time, in space, in an environment, and so on. He has written books on this. The strollology is a very serious discipline. You may somehow smile about, but in fact, it's very, very serious. And Burkhardt was a great theoretician of this. Now, there is one point of connection that I would like to talk about between Burkhardt and Cedric Price. And this point of connection is something that really touches my own profession, because I'm a planner. I'm an urbanist and a planner. And they both discussed the nature and the functions of the urban plan. And both, Burkhardt wrote a very interesting article called "Who Plans the Planning?" Who plans the planning? I mean, why something is planned and something is not planned? Who decides what should be planned? It's a very important, fundamental question. And Cedric Price on the other side, but more or less at the same time. Yes, you have it there. Yes, you have it in your little booklet. Yeah. Cedric Price at the same time, 64, 65, more or less the same time, wrote an article, fundamental article in the history of planning, which is called "No Plan." He did it with a very famous writer, critic, Rainer Banham, and with Peter Hall, Sir Peter Hall. And he wrote this article. Well, he fundamentally contested the nature of the planning system. Now, these two points of view, which are very, very similar in terms of very close, come from very different worlds. Now, the world of a, say, avant-garde architect completely immersed in his avant-gardic role and a teacher, very important teacher, but really at the core of the debate at that time. And the other, Burckhardt, was more like a strollologist. Of course, he had an important task at that time. I think he became the rector of Weimar University at some point, the school of Bauhaus. And they both contest the nature of the planning system. A planning system is kind of something they saw as something that was against the free expression of the people's will. In a way, a plan, it is by definition a top-down operation, something that requires a big institution that has the power and the power to regulate and the power to implement and so on. And he contested this practice in urban management and in the practice of the built environment as a practice that was non-conducive to the best solutions and of course against the free and democratic expression of. But I'm interested, and I think Burckhardt very similar, because when he asks the fundamental question, who plans the planning, is exactly because certain things have to be planned. I mean, if you have to do an electrical installation, I mean, you need a plan. But other things don't need to be planned. They can find their solution with other formulas. Now, which formulas? Of course, that's a big question, and I think the urbanists are, revolving around which other formulas can be used: advocacy planning, participatory planning, democratic planning, anarchy sometimes. So these two thinkers reached the same conclusion very, very early, 1964, 65. Think that at that time everybody was into planning, and it lasted for at least 20 more or even 30 more years. Now, of course, we know very well the limits of the planning model, and the critique of Cedric Price and Louis Burckhardt expressed at the same time were, I think, a fundamental starting point of this revolution in the approach.
Francesco, thank you so much. Tino, thank you so much. Thank you both.